The BAT Part 1. The Proposition. The man's name was Terry Moss, and he had been training at the dojo for 6 weeks when he made the bet. He was 29 years old, former Golden Gloves boxer from Philadelphia, with the specific quality of physical confidence that comes from having won fights in rings where winning actually mattered. He had moved to Torrance for work, something in aerospace. Chuck hadn't asked the details, and had found the dojo the way most people found it in 1976, driving past, noticing the sign, stopping in. He was good. This was visible in the first session. The boxing background gave him advantages that most new students didn't have: footwork, distance management, the specific understanding of how to generate power from the hips rather than from the arms alone. Chuck had worked with former boxers before and knew what they brought and what they needed to unlearn. Moss was bringing more than he needed to unlearn, which meant he was a serious student. On a Thursday evening in his 7th week, after the intermediate class had ended and most students had left, Moss approached Chuck at the desk. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Ask it," Chuck said. "The sparring protocols here," Moss said. "They're controlled, light contact, technical development. I understand the reasoning." "Good," Chuck said. "But I want to know what you're actually capable of," Moss said. "Not the teaching version, the real version." Chuck looked at him. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if you'd be willing to spar with me," Moss said. "Not the controlled version, the real version. Full contact, no holding back." He paused. "I've seen you demonstrate techniques. I've seen you correct students. I've read about the tournament record. But I want to see what the tournament record actually means. In the room, against me." Chuck was quiet for a moment. "Why?" "Because I don't know if what I'm learning here actually works," Moss said. "Not theoretically, practically, against someone who's actually trained to fight. Not kata against the air, fight against a person." "You've been in fights," Chuck said. "Boxing, you know what works." "I know what works in boxing," Moss said. "I don't know if karate works, and I won't know unless I test it against someone who knows what they're doing." He looked at Chuck directly. "I'm offering to be the test. You spar with me, full contact, and I'll know whether what you're teaching me is real or whether it's performance." Chuck looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "What's the bet?" Moss blinked. "What?" "You're making a proposition," Chuck said. "Propositions have stakes." "What are the stakes?" Moss thought about this. "If I land a clean shot to your head," he said, "you admit that boxing is a more practical fighting system than karate, and I stop training here. And if I win," Chuck said. "You won't," Moss said. Chuck smiled slightly. "Humor me." "If you win," Moss said, "I commit to training here for 2 more years, minimum. No questions asked. Whatever you teach, I learn." Chuck considered this. The bet was clear enough. The stakes were real. Moss was serious, not performing seriousness, actually serious. The question was whether the bet was worth taking. "One condition," Chuck said. "What?" "We do this on Saturday morning," Chuck said. 6 a.m. empty dojo, Ray Medina as witness. 3 rounds, 3 minutes each. Clean shot to the head wins. Everything else is points for assessment." "Agreed," Moss said. They shook hands. Part 2. What Ray Said. Chuck told Ray Medina about the bet on Friday afternoon. They were in the office, going through the monthly enrollment numbers, which was Ray's domain and which Chuck paid attention to with the specific quality of someone who understood that the numbers mattered but who didn't find them intrinsically interesting. "Terry Moss challenged you to a full contact sparring match," Ray said, "and you accepted." "Yes," Chuck said. "Why?" "Because he's serious," Chuck said, "and because the question he's asking is a real question. Does what we teach here actually work against someone who knows how to fight?" He won't know until he tests it. And he can't test it in the controlled environment because the controlled environment is designed not to answer that question. Ray was quiet for a moment. You could have said no. I could have, Chuck said, but then he would have left anyway. And he would have left believing that what we teach here doesn't work. Because the only reason to refuse the test is if you're uncertain about the outcome. Are you uncertain about the outcome? Ray said. No, Chuck said. Then why the bet? Ray said. Why not just spar with him and show him what he needs to see? Because the bet makes it real, Chuck said. Without stakes, it's just a demonstration. With stakes, it's a test. And what he needs to see is not a demonstration. He needs to see a test. Ray looked at him. What are you going to do? I'm going to spar with him, Chuck said. And I'm going to show him exactly what 15 years of training produces when it's tested against 6 weeks and a boxing background. You're going to hurt him, Ray said. No, Chuck said. I'm going to educate him. Part 3, Saturday morning. They arrived at 6 a.m. The dojo was empty. Ray had come early and set up the sparring area. The mats in the center of the floor, the specific configuration that created enough space for movement without making the space so large that distance became the dominant factor. Terry Moss came through the door at 5:58. He was wearing sparring gear, headgear, gloves, the standard equipment. He looked at Chuck, who was wearing gi pants and nothing else. No gear? Moss said. I don't need it, Chuck said. Moss looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded. All right. Ray stood at the edge of the mat. 3 rounds, he said. 3 minutes each. 1 minute rest between rounds. Clean shot to the head wins immediately. Everything else I'm scoring for assessment. Any questions? No, Chuck said. No, Moss said. Touch gloves, Ray said. They touched gloves. Moss backed to his corner. Chuck stayed in the center. Ray looked at his watch. Begin. Vomamountlis Anhalita 4. Round 1. Moss came forward immediately. This was his instinct from boxing. Establish position. Control distance. Pressure the opponent into defensive mode. He came forward with the footwork of someone who had spent years learning to move in a ring, light on the balls of his feet, weight distributed for rapid adjustment. Chuck watched him come. He didn't move backward. He didn't move forward. He stood in the center and watched. Moss threw the first combination. Jab, cross, hook, fast, technically sound. The jab was a rangefinder, the cross was the power shot, the hook was the follow-up. Standard boxing combination, executed well. Chuck slipped the jab, stepped inside the cross, and was already out of range when the hook arrived. Moss's fist passed through the space where Chuck's head had been half a second earlier. Chuck didn't counter. He reset to center. Moss circled. He was recalculating. The initial combination hadn't landed, which meant the distance calculation had been wrong or the timing had been wrong or both. He tried again. Different entry, same principle. Jab to draw the guard up, low kick to the lead leg, cross to the head. Chuck blocked the jab with his forearm, lifted his leg to check the kick before it landed, and moved his head 4 inches to the right. The cross missed by the same margin the previous combination had missed by. Still no counter from Chuck. Moss circled again. He was breathing harder now. Not from exertion, from the specific tension that comes from hitting air when you expect to hit target. He changed tactics, came in with a question, a feint with the right hand, watching for Chuck's response. Chuck didn't respond. He stayed neutral, watching. Moss committed to the feint, turned it into a real attack, right hand coming across in a wide hook that had genuine power behind it. Fast, committed. Chuck ducked under it, came up inside Moss's guard, and was chest to chest with him for exactly 1 second. Then he stepped out. Still no counter. The round ended at 3 minutes. Moss went to his corner. He was breathing hard, not exhausted, frustrated. Chuck stayed in the center. His breathing was unchanged. Umpanamentarigi. Mart 5, Round 2. Ray called time for the second round. Moss came forward again, but this time his approach was different, less technical, more aggressive. He had recognized in the first round that the technical approach wasn't working. Chuck was reading the combinations before they developed, moving before the attacks arrived, operating with a quality of anticipation that made the boxing combinations ineffective. So Moss shifted strategy. Instead of technical combinations, he came forward with volume. Not single shots or triple combinations, but continuous pressure. Jab, 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 circle, hook, cross hook, reset, jab, jab, low kick, high kick, jab. Continuous, aggressive. The strategy of someone who understands that if you can't hit the target with precision, you hit it with volume and one of the shots will land. Chuck moved through it, not defensively, not retreating, moving through the volume the way water moves through obstacles, finding the gaps, occupying the spaces between the attacks, never in the position where the attacks were landing. The jabs missed by inches, the hooks found air, the kicks were checked or avoided, and between each cluster of attacks, Chuck was closer. Moss felt this. The distance was collapsing. He was throwing more and landing less, and somehow Chuck was occupying more space than he had occupied at the start of the round. Moss threw a desperation combination, everything he had, full commitment, the boxing equivalent of emptying the clip. Right hand, left hand, right hand, left knee, spinning back fist. Chuck stepped inside the first punch, controlled Moss's lead arm at the elbow, and swept his rear leg. Moss went down, not hard, controlled, but down. Ray called the knockdown, reset. Moss got up. He looked at Chuck. Chuck's expression had not changed, neutral, present, no emotion. The round ended. Moss went to his corner. He was breathing heavily now, not just physically, the specific quality of someone who is beginning to understand that the thing they thought they knew isn't producing the results they thought it would produce. Chuck stayed in center, unchanged. Unchanged. Mossamentier Korspate Tisserand Part 6. Round 3. Ray called time for the third round. Moss came forward one more time, but the quality of his approach had changed again. The aggression was still there, but it was different now, less strategic, more raw. The frustration of the first two rounds had accumulated into something else. He was no longer trying to prove that boxing worked better than karate. He was trying to land one shot, any shot, the clean shot to the head that would win the bet. He came forward with everything, no technical setup, no combination logic, just pure committed attacks. He was faster now, not because his speed had increased, but because his defense had decreased. Every attack was fully committed, no guard, no retreat, just forward. Chuck let him come. And for the first 90 seconds of the third round, Chuck did what he had been doing in rounds 1 and 2, moved through the attacks, avoided the shots, controlled the distance. Then at the 90-second mark, Chuck decided the education was complete. He stepped forward into one of Moss's attacks, caught the incoming right hand at the wrist, pulled Moss off balance, and delivered a ridge hand strike to the side of Moss's neck. Light contact, controlled, but unmistakable. If Chuck had wanted to hit harder, the shot would have put Moss on the ground unconscious. Instead, it put him off balance, stumbling backward, looking at Chuck with the specific expression of someone who has just discovered something they had not previously known. Chuck reset to center. "Enough," Ray said. The round ended. The match was over. Moss stood in the center of the mat, breathing hard, looking at Chuck. "You didn't hit me," Moss said, "the whole time. You could have hit me any time you wanted, but you didn't. No, Chuck said. I was showing you what 15 years looks like when it's actually applied, not the hitting, the not needing to hit. Omothen Neuda Menentra Asaris Epi. What the bet proved. They sat in the office after. Ray had left. The dojo was still empty. Moss had taken off the headgear and gloves. He was holding a cup of water that Ray had given him and not drinking it. I thought I could take you, he said. I know, Chuck said. I was wrong. Yes. Moss was quiet for a moment. The techniques I was throwing, they were correct, technically sound. I've landed those combinations 100 times in the ring. Against boxers, Chuck said. Not against someone who's been training in a different system for 15 years. What's the difference? Moss said. The difference, Chuck said, is that boxing teaches you to hit and to avoid being hit within a specific set of constraints. The ring, the rules, the gloves, the timing. Within those constraints, boxing is extraordinarily effective, but those constraints don't exist outside the ring. He paused. What you were trying to do in the sparring match was apply boxing logic to a situation where the constraints were different. No ring, no rounds, no referee stopping the fight, different rules, and your training hadn't prepared you for different rules. And karate did, Moss said. Not karate specifically, Chuck said. The practice. 15 years of training in a system that assumes no constraints, no ring, no gloves, no rules except the rules of physics and anatomy. You learn to fight in a space where anything can happen, and that preparation, that 15 years of assuming no constraints, means you can adapt to any situation, including the situation where a skilled boxer is trying to land a clean shot. Moss looked at the water cup. I lost the bet. Yes, 2 years minimum. That was the deal. That was the deal, Chuck said. Moss looked at him. What do I get for 2 years? What you saw this morning, Chuck said. The ability to move through attacks that should land but don't. The ability to control distance without thinking about it. The ability to see what's coming before it arrives. The ability to operate in situations where the constraints are unknown. Can you teach that? Moss said. I don't know, Chuck said, but you're going to help me find out. Moss drank the water, put down the cup, extended his hand. Chuck shook it. See you Monday, Moss said. See you Monday, Chuck said. Terry Moss trained at the dojo for 4 years, not 2, 4. He earned his black belt in the 3rd year and stayed another year after that. He never sparred full contact with Chuck again. He didn't need to. The education had happened in 3 rounds on a Saturday morning in 1976, and everything that came after was building on what those 3 rounds had proven. The bet had been about whether karate worked against boxing. The answer turned out to be, the question was wrong. It wasn't about which system worked better. It was about what 15 years of training in any system produced when the training was genuine and the practitioner was serious. What it produced was the capacity to move through the world with less friction. That was the bet. That was what Moss had won by losing.